Good morning and welcome to the Central Florida chapter of the National Veteran Small Business Coalition. We are here to discuss the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification in a panel environment. The reason for this is because there's a lot of information that is continually being pushed out there. We want to kind of dive through and find out what is the truth, what is not, what are the requirements, what are the expectations, what is the timeline. So on our panel, we have Mr. Steve Bullock, Director of ISOP Solutions, Dana Pekas, President of ISOP Solutions as well, and then Kyle Lay, Founder and CISO at KLC Consulting, Amanda Gorski at Sophia ITC, Jonathan Williams is also a partner at Polero Maza, and Joshua Duvall as Managing Partner at Matros Edwards. So we have a lot of questions to ask this panel, and we might as well just go ahead and jump in and get started with, prior to the questions, I'd like to have each individual please introduce themselves and what they bring to the table as far as cybersecurity is concerned, their expertise. So I'll go ahead and start with Mr. Steve Bullock.
Yes, good morning. So I'm, as the Director of ISOP Solutions, I'm also retired U.S. Air Force, where I was a C4 ISR guy, technical instructor on mobile training team and at tech school. I was also a GS 334 for the Department of the Air Force, where I was a quality manager, configuration manager for the Minuteman III communications system. I'm retired software engineer from Lockheed Martin. I'm a lead ISO auditor for 8 different standards. I'm a CMMI level 5 for development guy, Six Sigma engineer, and the author of more than 90, that's 90, ISO training modules.
Wow, that's huge. So you pretty much understand the ISO requirements and how to implement them in different organizations. And we'll kind of get into the ISO standards here in a little bit in the discussion as well. Dana.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm the president of ISOP Solutions, and ISOP Solutions is an ISO implementation, education, and accredited ISO compliance company that utilizes the NIST 800-171 cloud platform. ISOP has also positioned itself to be a CMMC RPO, registered practitioner organization, and a CMMC C3PAO, CMMC third-party assessor organization. My background with ISO goes back to 1994.
Very nice. And we'll also get into the RPO versus the C3PAO and the responsibilities that they hold. Kyle.
Hi, everybody. Kyle Lai, CIS President and CISO of KLC Consulting, and been doing a lot of the security for the past 20 years or so, and have been doing a lot of audit, security assessment, penetration testing, and third-party security assessment. On the DoD side, I was at this one point doing the IASE, where the post sticks and cybersecurity training, and then have been involved since DIACAP, RMF, NIST 800-171, 53, and now CMMC.
Thank you, Kyle. You actually mentioned another touch point is the RMF component, which is also part of this whole CMMC compliance requirement. Amanda.
Good segue, James. My name is Amanda Gorski. I've been doing DoD security for about 17 years now. And what I bring to the table for this panel is the RMF portion. I'm very familiar with the different policies and how they're integrating with the CMMC.
Very nice. The technical side of the house, much needed for this. Jonathan.
Thanks, James. I am John Williams. I'm a partner with Polero Maza. We're a law firm that represents government contractors, and I'm a part of our cybersecurity and data privacy practice group, where we've been really focusing on helping our clients, which are largely small businesses, to be aware that these requirements are coming, what cyber requirements are already in your contracts, and how do you handle things like flow down with your subcontractors and sort of managing the legal and contractual risks especially with CMMC coming online. So glad to be here today.
Thank you and welcome aboard. Again, you just mentioned the legal side. How important is that within this compliance component? Not asking a question yet, but we're going to step into that here shortly. Joshua.
Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Duvall, managing partner and founder at Matros Edwards. Like Jonathan, I'm a government contracts and cyber attorney. Prior to practicing law, I was a malware analyst and a sysadmin. So I have sort of the technical background in addition to that. But like what Jonathan mentioned, there's a lot of legal and compliance issues that sort of are intertwined with the CMMC. And so that's what I bring to the table. So thanks.
Very nice. Thank you for the introductions. Appreciate that. So from a question aspect, what is FCI and CUI information, and what are the level requirements to handle either or both? Who wants to take this one on?
Well, I mean, I can get the ball rolling. I'm probably the least technical person on this panel, but at least from a compliance standpoint, if you have CUI, you've got to be at level 3 CMMC, right? So, I mean, that's sort of the equivalent of the current NIST 800-171, roughly. So if you're currently compliant with the DFARS requirements for handling CUI, then you should hopefully slide pretty easily into a level 3. But I think the DoD has said that hopefully maybe upwards of 60% of firms will only need a level 1, but if you have CUI in your network, a level 1 isn't going to be good enough.
That is correct.
Right.
So let's kind of break that open. So we kind of discussed just from that statement, the FCI component, right? And that's the maturity level 1 aspect that required that majority of the organizations are going to need, because that holds your contracts, right? That's your contracts with the government, the FCI. In order to go to the maturity level 3 from a CUI aspect, that requires what?
In terms of the number of practices, I think from the NIST 800-171, it require 110 or controls or practices, right? And the CMMC, that adds another 20 additional CMMC practices, they called, and plus that you have to, for level 3, you need to have like 3 additional processes that established. So yeah, I think everything is all built on top of the previous level. So I think that's kind of how the CMMC is designed. They build, if you're required to handle CUI, yep, then it's going to be 130 practices that you have to put together and 3 processes that have to be established.
Absolutely. But I noticed that you didn't mention maturity level 2. What happened to level 2? I heard
sure
1. Yeah, I heard 1 for FCI, and then we jumped to 3 for CUI. What happened to the number 2?
Number 2 is kind of a transition state between level 1 and 3. So I think for companies that I would say kind of a DoD, when we listen to them, people are going to go for level 1 certification for handling FCI. They're going to go for level 3 to handling CUI. But level 2 is kind of in an interesting state. It's like in between. Most people probably not going to certify for level 2 because it's really just a transition state. But that's kind of how I understand it. It's help you to establish, let you kind of keep track of how far you, how much work you have left between level, before you actually get to level 3, I would say.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Kyle said. I mean, what I've heard is that it's unlikely DoD will put out contracts under a level 2 requirement. And I think that's the key to keep in mind here is that CMMC is going to be a contract-driven requirement. You know, that the contract you're pursuing is going to require a certain level of CMMC. So you will need whatever level it is that the contract requires. So if there aren't going to be contracts that require level 2, we're not going to need to be applying for level 2 certification. I think you really need a level 1 or a level 3 or potentially higher, depending on what you're doing. But for most small businesses, it's probably going to be a level 1 or a level 3.
Okay. And we started talking about the different practices and processes that's behind level 1 and level 3. Let's kind of go into a little bit more deeper dive from a NIST aspect. I believe that level 1 kind of encompasses the far side of the house, then as you start going into maturity level 2, 3, 4, and up, you start breaking into 2 different NISTs. One is the 800-53, and the other one is the 800-171. Can you tell me a little bit more about these and how we're going to implement this from a outside organization, a contractor's organization versus a government organization?
Yeah, I think 800-171 is really for contractors. Contractors that are required to handle CUI, and 853 or FISMA or some kind of RMF, they are kind of focused on using 853. So 800-171 is kind of the number of controls is really a subset of 853. And yeah, if I was a government, or if you're actually going for some of the other government requirements like RMF and the FISMA, that will actually go with 853.
Okay, so help me understand this. You're saying that 171 is more for the non-federal systems and organizations, but it's still based off of the 800-53 from a federal information system aspect. Is that correct?
No, that is correct. It's just a subset of 853, the controls.
Okay, so anybody that works within the government should have some type of understanding behind those controls, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they will need to understand that. Yeah, because a lot of the 800-171 practices, the controls or practices, they all refer back to the 853 controls. There is a direct relevance there.
Great, great.
Yeah,
So this should be not too hard of a maneuver for companies to handle.
Well,
Yep,
yeah, I just
I'll
want
say.
to echo what you were saying, James, because these requirements already exist, right? So
Yes.
the topic this morning is CMMC, and we just got the proposed CMMC rule a couple of days ago. It's really long. I have not made it all the way through yet, but I think the bottom line is that there's still a while yet before CMMC is going to be fully online at DoD, right? They're doing this crawl, walk, run approach whereby
Yes.
2025 it'll be fully a requirement in all the contracts, but it could be a requirement sooner depending on your contracts. But you're already subject to the requirements that you're just talking about as a DoD contractor or a civilian contractor. There are FAR provisions that require basic cyber safeguards. It's equivalent to a level 1. So I think that's one of the things we try to remind our clients is let's get prepared for CMMC, but let's also not lose lock on the fact that you're already subject to cybersecurity requirements in your contract. So we want to make sure you're doing what you need to do today, and that'll also help you prepare for CMMC coming down the road.
Very nice. Thank you for that. And you also mentioned I guess a bit of a timeline in your discussion point there. What is the timeline? What exactly is transpiring across that timeline? Can anybody help me with that one?
I can take that, I guess. So there's two things. There's actually a parallel timeline, I would imagine. So right now, the CMMC is not going to be, quote, fully operational until October 1st, 2025. Until that time, the Department of Defense Office, I believe, of Acquisition and Sustainment has to approve any solicitation that contains a CMMC requirement. So for the next 5 years, it's sort of a, put your hands in the air. No one really knows what solicitation is going to get approved for that. But, and then this really isn't for today's conversation, but the interim rule that was published yesterday also included a NIST SP 800-171 self-assessment as part of this, quote, two-pronged approach. So what's going to happen is contractors are going to be required to certify, and this is a major difference between the CMMC and the current DFAR 252.204-7012 clause, which is compliance with the 110 controls under NIST Special Publication 800-171 can include a system security plan plus a POAM. So you can have 90 out of the 110 controls with a plan of action to achieve the remaining 20 and still be compliant with that regime. And that is something that contractors will have to self-certify under this NIST DoD assessment methodology that they just released. So so contractors aren't out of the woods because they're thinking, oh, I might not have to have a CMMC until 2025. Well, they could put it in your solicitation before then, but you still have to deal with this separate prong, which is now basically verifying your self-attestation that you should have been doing under the DFAR clause to begin with. So even though 2025 is the fully operational date for CMMC, there's a lot that's happening today.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to add to Josh's comments. Yeah, it seems like they say they are going to phase in over the next 5 years. So yeah, there are going to be a few thousand companies getting certified, and I think there are going to be quite a few contracts, RFPs that's coming out with some CMMC requirements. But yeah, it's going to be CMMC, and some of the existing one will have to follow ANJO 171 before CMMC is fully implemented.
Okay, excellent. And you said something about self-certification. So I guess a company could kind of go through just from a beginning stage and saying, we think we have maybe a couple other practices that we need to actually, bring up to standard. But in the meantime, I can kind of POAM that. However, when it actually comes to the CMMC accreditation part, are there any POAMs authorized?
No, you have to have to meet a CMMC threshold for a particular certification level, you have to meet every single requirement that the CMMC provides. So if under level 3, which is what John mentioned, is sort of the demarcation line for handling controlled and classified information, contractors will have to have 130 practices in place, plus the 3 maturity processes. They have to demonstrate that in order to be eligible for that level 3 stamp, basically. If a contractor falls short in even just one of those practices, then they could theoretically be given only a level 2, but it seems like there's going to be a mechanism to challenge a CMMC rating. And so, if it requires extra amplification or explanation, maybe there's a window of opportunity to sort of correct something before the CMMC board fully certifies. But that's a lot of unknown. We really don't have much beyond what was released in the interim rule, but that is sort of separate from the accreditation body publishing their processes. So I'm not sure if John has anything to add on that, but there's another wrinkle there.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned, I guess, so there's a challenge component. I don't really want to get into the challenge component, but if an organization believes they are mature enough, they have gone through the audit, that audit information that package has been submitted to the CMMAB to QA and then bless off and provide that certification letter. And if that during that QA they find out that it's missing something, or it's not up to the exact compliance that is required, what happens? Where does that go? We talked a little bit about RPOs and C3PAOs, and how would they fit into that, helping the end contracting company to get over that hurdle?
That process is still somewhat of a black box. All that we kind of know now is what little information was provided in the interim rule, which says that that if a contractor disputes the outcome of a C3PAO assessment, the contractor may submit a dispute adjudication request to the accreditation body along with supporting information related to the errors, malfeasance, or ethical lapses by the C3PAO. The accreditation board will follow a formal process to review the adjudication request and to provide a preliminary evaluation. If the contractor does not accept the accreditation body's preliminary finding, the contractor may request an additional assessment by the accreditation body staff. So that's one part of it, but I suspect, and I think John will probably echo this, that there's probably going to be more coming down the pike, because I don't think when you're talking about millions of dollars in government contracts on the line and this CMMC rating being the gatekeeper for that, people will be wanting to defend what they believe is right. And if they believe they have a level 3 and they're getting certified at a level 2, I think they'll be willing to challenge that. But I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns right now, so it's hard to speculate.
What if they challenge it? Go ahead.
I just wanted to echo, I agree with Joshua completely on that. I mean, I think it's one of the real challenges on CMMC. We're going to have a variety of assessors, and I think we have some that are on the panel. Maybe they could give certainly better perspective on this than me. But I think there's a concern about the potential variation in the quality of the certification processes. From one assessor to the next, how standardized are the processes going to be and the outcomes. So you could absolutely be disadvantaged as a contractor if you got a bad review, a bad reviewer and a bad review as a result of that, and then you're knocked out of being able to pursue work. And what's your recourse? How meaningful is your recourse, and what role does DoD have in all that? They're requiring this, but yet staying somewhat distant from the process of it. That raises interesting hackles too. So I do think these are questions that are still to be entirely resolved. They're just open at this point.
Yeah, because the last thing you want is to go through the audit, submit your audit package, be denied, challenge it, be denied again, challenge it one other time, and be denied for 3 years. So it's huge from a training aspect from CMMC-AB to provide the correct training across the board to your practitioners, to your assessors, to make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to all of those practices and processes.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of talk about more on the practices and processes side and from an ISO aspect, okay? Because there's many companies that already have the ISO standards in place, 9001, 27001, 20000, and stuff like that. Is there a way to take some of those ISO standards that have been applied within the organizations and actually maneuver some of those processes and practices that were in compliance from an ISO standard and apply them into the CMMC component?
The short answer for that is yes. There are 3 standards: the ISO 9001, which is a quality standard, the 20000, and the 27000, which are the cybersecurity and the IT standards. Those 3 standards all have components within them that link to CMMI level 1. So if you have those 3 ISO standards, you will be having the processes in place for compliance for the CMMI level 1, provided you go in and update your documentation to refer the language properly so that it refers to the CMMC in addition to the ISO. Steve has been cross-mapping all the ISO standards to the different CMMC practices, so I'll let him give you the long answer on that. Go ahead, Steve.
What I did was I took the maturity level 1 for CMMC, the practices, the 17 practices that are required, and I went into for each practice, I evaluated the inputs, the requirements from NIST 800, 171, and 53, and so forth, and I looked at the table within 171 and did a cross mapping to 27,001 for those that were applicable, and then I looked also at ISO 20,000 because some of the practices talk about asset management. Well, that's IT service delivery. That's ISO 20,000-1. There's also configuration management, which is ISO 20,000. That covers it. 9001 gets in play when you're looking at personnel and training and so forth. So there's a lot, and all of the ISO standards currently have risk management embedded within them in one form or another. So yes, for maturity level 1, if you have what we call the trifecta, the ISO 9000, 27001, and 20,000-1, you should be covered for maturity level 1. You should be, but it has to be evaluated. That's why we have the RPs, the registered practitioners out there, so they can do the evaluation and see if that is true for those companies that are certified to those 3 standards.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's great information. So having ISO standards, it already kind of puts you into that I'm ahead of the game component.
Correct.
That's great. We have many clients that have the trifecta for this very reason. So that's one of the things that we've done. Now, Steve's continuing to cross-map all the rest of the practices throughout the different ISO standards also. So that's a continued effort.
Excellent. Good job. Now to get everybody else on board to a maturity level 1 and then into a 3. So I think we're already ahead of the game with that. So I have a couple of questions that came in from a couple other organizations and people that would like to ask this to you, and it's open. So number 1 is concerning the handling of CUI. Does previous data and other company data from past contracts need to be handled as a new contract business? In other words, do we need to set up a CUI data store or solution that would also include our data as it currently sits?
I think it's probably going to be depending on your scope, and if you actually do have the CUI and that is in scope, most likely it will be in scope because it was related to the contract that you're already doing. Yeah, most likely we'll have to make sure that is in scope, and that it's probably better to have that in scope, right? Because it's all CUI, rather than do it once. Twice, then you just do it all once. But it really depends on the scope and the boundary, how you define it. And yeah, I think that's a short answer.
It's better to be safe than sorry, right? Doesn't matter if it was a previous contract, move it into that same database, that storage, just so it's handled, it's closed, containered, right?
Exactly.
It just makes sense. Okay, awesome. Here's another question. Are there any resources on how to manage the markings of documents? For instance, are there utilities that mark Word, Excel, PDF, emails automatically, or is this something that has to be done manually in order to be, or put in place somehow? Is there an application?
Can I answer that for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the National Archives archives. Isn't it archives.gov, Dana? I think
Yes.
that's where. But there they have an area for the CUI, and on their page they actually have a link that gives you a free download of the marking document of how to mark things.
Great. I'd like to be able to share that link after this. Can we go ahead and send this out to everybody that attended?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, but but in terms of handling, so for example, if you have an email that came in that you mark as a CUI, then you probably have to look for some tools that be able to actually identify those marking directly from the email. So you can, most likely you have to be encrypted and when you do the communication. So that for that piece, that will require some kind of special tools to handle that, to automatically handle that type of, if you want to automate.
Okay. Speaking of emails, can I just use O365, Google to receive some of these documents, CUI and FCI? What's going to happen? What's going to be the requirement coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I believe so. I think there's the Office 365, if you are going with a level that require to actually handle the CUI, you will have to go with what they call GCC Government Cloud Computing, the Office 365 GCC High, because from the DISA, they have the requirements for handling CUI. It requires FedRAMP Impact Level 4, IL4, which means from the Office 365, you have to be Office 365 GCC High or above. All right.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
So that's just another cost that an organization has to incur, correct?
Yes, yeah, and there's not really an easy way because you have to go for all GCC High or nothing. So it seems like there are some other companies that are trying to figure out a better cost-effective way to handling CUI, because probably not all the people within your organization need to handle CUI. So you don't need to make everybody that handles CUI.
Perfect point. Yes.
At least what I've understood is that, but open to hearing what the rest of the panelists think, like just because you might utilize a third-party provider like that, it doesn't completely eliminate your need to have CMMC, because you're still the contractor that's receiving the CUI from the government that's bidding on a solicitation that requires CMMC. So my understanding's been that just because you might use cloud providers and you are a small business that doesn't have an extensive internal network, that doesn't eliminate the need for you to have CMMC.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the process and responsibility still rely on the contractor.
Yeah, I mean, it might make it easier, simpler for you to go about the CMMC preparedness process. But we get that question a lot. Well, I just use Google and other cloud services, so do I need to worry about this?
Google. Yeah, Google is safe. How about
the other question we get a lot is, well, I just, I make furniture. Do I need to worry about this? And I don't do complex weapon systems. So does CMMC not apply to me? But the answer is yes, it does.
Yes, it does. So yeah, it sounds like they're going to have to segment off a certain portion of their environment in order to handle that FCI, CUI, and then give the correct permissions to those individuals that are authorized to see that within that organization. So excellent. Here's another question. I think we have just a little bit more time, and then we can open it up to other questions within the in the attendee arena, if you don't mind. So start preparing your questions now. We'll start asking them right after this other question. So how much CUI should we expect to be handling? More specifically, does a piece of CUI reveal itself as such, or is this a determination we have to make? Example, a new contract is one. Are all emails and documents related to that contract immediately deemed CUI, or would we be or would it be something more specific like only official government release documents?
Well, my perspective has been the government has to mark it. So if the government hasn't marked it, then at least you're in a gray area about whether it's CUI. But I'm curious what others think about that.
Yeah. Based on my understanding that at the time of when you actually won the contract, well, first of all, I think they will specify that this contract actually involves CUI or not on the contract itself. However, to be a little bit more specific in terms of identify what is considered CUI, then you have to talk to the contract officer in the very beginning of the contract and just identify the list of information that will consider CUI from the government's point of view. So then we can, draft it, have an understanding, and go from there.
Very nice. So with all this coming down the pipe as far as CMMC, the requirements, the FCI, stuff like this is going to be a cost inhibited component to all contracting companies, whether they're going to contract on the first 15 DoD contracts that are going to be deemed a requirement for CMMC compliance to be on that contract to 2026 when all contracts become CMMC required. With that said, is there any type of help, assistance from a funding aspect from the government? Help from a pain point aspect, because this could be very costly.
Yeah, it's not very clear today. If you actually go to the DoD where they hosted the CMMC model, there's a CMMC FAQ from the government website. It really says that yes, the cost is reimbursable, but other than that one sentence, there is no detail. So if you win a contract, I think you can bill back to the government, but in terms of what is be able to allow to bill back, that's uncertain. And also, if you did not win the federal contract, you want to go with CMMC level 3, for example, the cost probably not going to be reimbursable until you win a contract that requires CMMC level 3.
Okay.
That's my initial understanding, but it's still very vague.
Very nice. I've heard from a Florida aspect, the Department of Economic Opportunity is actually standing up a cybersecurity training program that's going to help provide some funds back to the contracting companies that that are going to work with the government for the CMMC requirement. So from a Florida aspect, I think we're going to get some relief on that. From a federal aspect and other other states unsure of yet what their goal is, or if they've even started that process to assist. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the rest of the attendees, and let's see what kind of questions we start getting.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Earl Morgan from the NVSBC. On your screen, you should see a panel. Go ahead and type in your questions in that text box. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Earl Morgan from the NVSBC. There should be a text box on your screen. Go ahead and type in your questions and we will read them out to everybody. Looks like we have no questions so far.
Is anybody raising their hand? Did I see a hand raised with Sam? Is there any way to unmute them by chance, Earl?
Hold on for a minute. This is GoToWebinar, so let me see if we can. And okay, I will unmute everyone if they could speak. I think Doug Anderson's the only one to speak right now. His mic is unmuted if he has any questions. Okay, hold on. So this is from Tia Bond. I'm still learning about CMMC, but I'm curious as small business, whose core competency is healthcare staffing? I'm curious at what level should we be pursuing? Level 3?
That's a good question. Who would like to take that from a healthcare aspect? Question is are they providing healthcare back into the government? Steve, Dana, if you're answering the question, I can't hear you. Let's see if I can. Yeah.
Hold on. I think we're having some technical issues here.
All right.
Hold on, Dana, you should be unmuted. Right? Yep, there we go.
Now we're back in the game. Thanks,
There we
Earl.
go.
I don't know if you heard what I said. This is Dana, but I'm not sure how I would answer that question because I don't know if I fully understand what the question is as healthcare relates to the CMMC level 3.
She said,
Okay.
for example,
My thought was that she's just wondering in general, like as a healthcare services provider, what do I need to be doing around CMMC? Is it a level 3? I mean, it is an individualized determination. It really depends on the contracts you pursue and the information in your network. But if I had to take a guess, I would say a healthcare services provider probably needs to be at a level 3. I would suspect you do have CUI in your network under your contracts. That would be my guess.
So one of her statements that she added to it was that they provide healthcare professionals to the VA, for example. So at a minimum, she would have to be at the FCI from a contract aspect. If there's anything from a CUI aspect, then she would have to be at a level 3.
Well, I think so. There's two things. As it stands now, the CMMC is going to apply to DoD contracts. But if you have, I guess the easiest way is to backtrack to find what type of procurements within the DoD that are the similar type of services that you provide, and see if those prior solicitations include the -7012 clause in it to give you an idea of what you might expect in the future. The DoD in their interim rule, interestingly, published the top 5 NAICS codes that they believe will be impacted by this, and that I don't see. I'm not sure if healthcare fits within any of those, but the easiest answer is to see what has been done in the past, because like Jonathan mentioned earlier, when the government is getting ready to go through acquisition planning, they're going to be the determining force as to what CMMC's level would require at the prime contract level, and then what portions of the solicitation don't contain CUI, and so that a potential sub could, be at a level 2 because they're only handling, a certain performance of work within the overall thing. But that wouldn't negate the fact that the prime might have to have a level 3 or higher. So, in terms of what's going to happen in the future, it's hard to say. And the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head is to see the similar types of DoD solicitations that have come out in the past, and then see if they've included the current DFARS clause, which is 252.204-7012, and that is the current clause that relates to protecting controlled unclassified information. I don't know if John has any other ideas, but it's, I think a lot of folks are struggling to find out if they're going to have to include this. So unless they have a current contract with that clause in it, they probably wouldn't know.
Yeah, you're absolutely.
I think that's good feedback.
I think it's a good idea, and also it will be good to actually reach out to the contract officer of the or the government to actually ask to see some details. If they do have a RFI or some open kind of a discussion period, yeah, that's a good time to ask.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that discussion, Joshua and Kyle, in regards to the VA specifically, because they don't fall underneath DoD. This is more geared towards DoD right now. It's not to say that down the pipe, DOJ, Department of Veterans Affairs, state, local, county governments won't implement a CMMC requirement.
Yeah, there is a development from you probably heard that GSA, because a lot of government or DoD agencies actually use GSA. So GSA, the STARS 3 contract, and I believe there's another contract that already put in the CMMC clause in their contract that's upcoming. So if you actually, in the 5 years, when you actually do the option, yeah, we might actually use the CMMC as a requirement. So the language is already there. And I believe somebody was mentioning about the NASA SOUP that's been used quite a bit by, this contract vehicle used a lot by the DoD side as well. They are considering that CMMC, or they have a suspicion that CMMC is going to go in there very quickly.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question that we're going to move on to is, first, it's a statement. There has been some mention that this could cost us $40,000 or more. Can anyone speak to this?
Nowhere that we've seen have they announced pricing that's confirmable yet. And that goes for the RPOs, the RPs, the assessors, and the C3PAOs. We're waiting for that information to be confirmed.
So there's another cost component to it too. I've got the same perspective that Dana does, that I don't think anybody knows what the certification itself is going to cost, but then there's also the internal costs that you need to incur in order to get ready to be certified at whatever level you're going to be certified. If you're going for a level 1, those are really pretty basic stuff, antivirus software and physical logs of visitors to your office. I mean, there probably should not have to be a very extensive cost internally to prepare for a level 1. You're probably, most contractors, already very close, if not all the way there. But I have heard, and I'm not, we don't do this, so this is just anecdotal, but I have heard companies say that the cost of getting prepared for a level 3, not the actual certification cost, but just doing everything I need to do internally to be level 3 ready with my network and my processes and documentation and management of it, that's a ballpark figure that I've heard as well. I'm sure it varies by company and by provider, but I have heard figures like that for the cost of getting prepared for a level 3, not level 1.
And this,
And
Steve, and
go ahead.
you also have the continuing costs of maybe the FTE, full-time employee, that is managing all this, and then the continuous monitoring. And James and I discussed the continuous monitoring aspect, and we don't know what they're going to monitor and how it should be monitored. But the anticipation is, if you make a document change, if you have a brand new subcontract that comes on board and you issue laptops or phones or something like that, then your whole profile has just changed. Right, James?
Correct. So the continuous monitoring is a tricky one that still has not been defined by DoD, and what that requirement is, even from CMMC. From a continuous monitoring aspect, from what I've read so far, is that there's the possibility of putting some type of agent or agentless component to all your endpoints, so that it sends back data back to DoD saying, hey, I'm still in compliance. Oh, nope, I just added a new router to the network. Now you're out of compliance. So we don't know definitively yet, but who knows yet, right? Also, I think, Tan, you just touched on a good point here. She's saying that some larger primes are requiring all of their sub-Ks to at least be at a level 1. It doesn't matter if they're performing on a DoD contract or not. I think I'd like to have Jonathan kind of talk to that one, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising. The DoD says you have to flow it down. So now they do say you don't have to flow it down at the same level that the prime contract requires. So if a large prime has to be a level 5, they shouldn't just automatically flow down level 5 to all their subs. But flowing down a level 1, yeah, that doesn't, I mean, they're going to have to flow it down. If you're going to work in the ecosystem of large DoD prime contractors, you're not going to avoid CMMC just because you don't directly work on DoD contracts. I just think that's a reality that folks in the defense industrial base, supply chain risk is a sort of a top line point in all of what we're doing here and in other areas. There's really been an increased focus on supply chain risk as a result of COVID, and an unrelated issue we're not here to talk about today, but the Section 889 requirements around the Chinese IT equipment. There's a real focus in this area. So if you are in the supply chain of defense DoD contractors, this is just a new reality. So this is an investment to maintain a competitive advantage in that space. It is, unfortunately, for small businesses, a cost of doing business in that space.
Jonathan, this is Steve again. You hit on a very important thing. You mentioned let's say a prime is at a maturity level 5, that they bid on the contract, they've won the contract, and now they're going to sub out pieces of that contract, correct, to the DIB, members of the DIB. But hypothetically, and I've seen this when I was at Lockheed, we would bring subs in that were working in secure rooms that quite possibly, I don't want to go too deep in this, but quite possibly those people in those secure rooms, which were subs, would be at a level 5. And that's not a hypothetical. I actually saw something like that before we had the CMMC when I was at Lockheed. So we had subs working on highly classified material.
Mm-hmm.
That happens.
I've heard people talk about, the concept of secure enclaves, or that one of the ways that primes can help subs deal with this is to have the subs come into the prime's facility and work only on the prime's network. And so then that takes some of the burden off of the small business subcontractors. They would not need to have the same level of certification because this information won't be touching their network. So, but yeah, that's a push pull that's going to really, I mean, it's always an important push pull, how much is being flowed down, how you're shifting risk between primes and subs. But CMMC is just the latest, battlefront there between primes and subs. And as a subcontractor, it's important that you resist what primes often take the shotgun approach in flowing things down. That it is important to make sure that you know what you're supposed to be obligated to do as a sub and what you're not, so that you can push back if they're trying to make you sign up for more of a CMMC requirement than maybe you should have to.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in that, Jonathan. I actually had the opportunity to go through the registered practitioner exam this past weekend, and it did mention that if a subcontractor is required to see CUI information but has not matured to that level yet, you can offset it by having the prime set, bring them in through an account on their own domain, right? And then they can review the information as long as they're not able to send it to themselves, print it off, stuff like that, and take it with them. Right. So there has to be, checks and balances from a security aspect, so that they don't bring that back to their facility where they're not compliant yet. But there is a small way around it temporarily. We have one more question. I'd like to get this one through. This one's for Sam. He asked the question, if we have the ISO trifecta, what kind of hardware software investment would we have to set aside, and what do you think the costs may or may not be?
Steve?
Well, I was going to say, just give us a couple $1 million and we'll take care of that for you.
Sam's in. I saw that. He's typing right now.
Good. The cost varies. If they have the trifecta already, and if they're using the latest version of Office 365 that falls within the CUI, correct?
Oh, 365 GG, yes.
So that follows the CUI and so forth. They're pretty darn close. I don't know about the cost involved if they're already there. I really don't know. I mean, but if they're following that, and if they have that latest Office 365, I think they're good to go for maturity level 1. That's just me. I'd have to, if I was to walk in and perform an ISO 27001 audit, I would be inspecting their server if they have a server. Many companies nowadays, they do the cloud. So that's where
the only variable with that, Steve, then too, maybe this continuous monitoring, which was the conversation that we also talked about. And maybe, James, you can elaborate more on the continuous monitoring aspects of where that may or may not be handled.
Yeah, so there's obviously different hardware and software platforms that are out there for continuous monitoring to make sure that you're not vulnerable within your environment, right? Now that you've had the server that is built out and there's certain checkboxes within the practices and processes, validated, in compliance, package has been sent up, you're blessed off. You need something that's going to continue to monitor and make sure that stays locked. It could be a patch that comes in and opens up that wall, that firewall or something, right? So continuous monitoring is going to give you the insight right then and there to say, hey, now I'm vulnerable. Okay, I'm mitigating it now. I don't know what the DoD's requirement is at this point in time for continuous monitoring and the checks and balances behind that, because you see patches come in all the time. We have patch Tuesdays for Microsoft. We have patches for Adobe, firmware upgrades for your network compliance systems, right? Those have a tendency of sometimes breaking something or opening up a vulnerability. It's supposed to, fix vulnerabilities, but it may open up a vulnerability. Once it opens up, do we have, from a DoD aspect, a certain amount of time to fix that and stay within your certification? That's something that we're going back and asking. We're digging deep into this one. So stay tuned for more on the continuous monitoring component, because that's a huge question. And how much does it cost? What is their requirement, and how are they filtering that data back to them? That's another question.
Well, we have network operations centers, we have security operations centers, and you can pay a company upwards of 5 or 10,000, maybe as low as 2 per year to monitor your network for you, if you trust that company that you're connected up to.
Absolutely agree with that.
And the one other variable that still isn't identified 100% yet is the continuous monitoring on the practices themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Are they going to have quarterly reviews, monthly reviews? Are they going to have annual reviews? It's a 3-year certification, but yet there has to be continuous monitoring. So that is the other aspect of the practices we're waiting for the definition on.
Correct.
Sorry, we couldn't answer your question more definitively. But I think Steve's original number was a little high. So it's somewhere less than that and 0.
I don't know. Don't know. Well, the original number, yeah, a couple million. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more? Do we mind going over just a minute or two? I think this one is just kind of stepping.
Yeah.
This one's also segueing into the monitoring. It was just dealing with regarding Azure Cloud has a self-monitoring. Is a third-party monitoring required or recommended? Let's wait until we find out what DoD's requirements are before you implement something like that. I mean, so personally, for a company aspect, I'm going to implement it because I want to make sure that I'm still compliant. But from a DoD aspect, I'd rather have, before telling everybody to go out and buy monitoring, equipment and software, let's kind of, what is DoD, doing?
I agree.
Okay. Well, this concludes our CMMC panel discussion. Appreciate the time everybody has put in to join the panel, and we'll let you get back to lunch. I think you have a half an hour left, 25 minutes.
Depends on your time zone.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.